All right. Well, by at least semi-popular demand, although by my measure, it's quite popular. The wise men are back. Are you bubbling, both of you?
But both inside and outside, I think I'm bubbling. Yes.
Did you guys ever think that in our lives in sports that would be the magic word? Here we are in July, this wonderful time in the normal sports calendar, because we're in the heart of baseball season, great golf and tennis events, football starting, and we're talking bubbles.
You know what? You don't. There's all this stuff you never envisioned. I mean, you never envisioned a pandemic. I mean, hey, I never. You know what? I have to say, I never even thought about why there ever could be a civil war in this country. But now I sort of understand why. And looking at the games, looking at baseball, you sort of, I care. What I care mostly about are the people that I care about who are involved in the games. The people who play it, the ones who run it, the ones who promote it, and the people who pay to go see it, is sort of what we're seeing now. Is it sort of better than nothing? I sort of think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Every environment that I walk into, and I've talked about this before, I'm a giant fan of the original Twilight Zone with Rod Serling having a cigarette always in his fingers. And every environment that I go in, I see Rod in the corner, like envision, if you will. Like, no, I can't envision that. And you'd be walking on, like, Pat, you go outside your street, Ted, and people now have the sidewalk shuffle. Even if you have a mask on and they see you coming, they immediately hit the other side of the sidewalk, like, and ripping their dogs on the other part of the sidewalk. No, to see cutouts at a ball game and sound piped in and players with masks, no, I could never, even in my wildest mushroom-induced days, envision that.
Well, wait a minute. That sounds like a lead into another episode right there. Valley Stream mushroom-induced days?
I'm not going there. I'm not going there.
It's American University. It was the flower power generation. As a Long Islander, you would know about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting
Southern
there.
California didn't know about any of that stuff.
So I'm watching the last two nights, and each of you, the ballparks that you and the teams that you were so integral to, and they're having to adapt to this craziness. So what was it like, Pat Wolf-Free? What was it like to watch and listen to this incredibly, improvised method of having baseball played?
Well, I still, I still communicate with some of the people who are involved in it, and sort of sympathize with what they have to go through. But that's sort of the way I think about it is, okay, if I was sort of actually figuring out a way to present this or do it, how would I react? And I just think it's, I'm kind of looking to say, okay, maybe it's because I'm so starved for entertainment, but I'm looking at it and I'm trying to figure it out. I'm thinking, I look at the Giants and I, I don't really know many of the players that they have. I mean, I know some of them, but I think it's interesting now with the sort of this expanded roster that they have, and they have this whole penchant they have now for players that are very versatile, who can play, sort of any position, and they can move around. This has sort of become a platoon game, and that's what they're doing, and that's the way they're going to go. They have enough pitchers that I don't think they can throw a pitcher every inning, but they're going to try to see what they do, and they're going to try to see if they can win with this, which I think is, I think it's interesting. I mean, they'll continue to do that until it's proven that it either doesn't work, or if it works, everybody else will copy it. So I think that's worth watching.
Yeah.
And again, it's an easy hit on the A's. You talk about their attendance woes over the last few years, saying, so I watched the other night, what's different? And what's different is the magic between the players and the fans. And in all of these sports that will be in the bubble, no matter what technology is put in, you're not going to have that. So that was number one for me. And the other part that Pat and I have a lot of experience, even with no fans, there's a whole bunch of people working those games. You think about their safety, and not a lot of people are paying attention to that. I think that's really, really important, that even, NFL, no fans, you're still going to have a few hundred people working. How is that all going to mesh in terms of keeping everyone safe, including the players?
Yeah. I think we touched on this. One of our conversations previously was that Wimbledon made the calculation that if they were to conduct their championships this year with no fans, it would still take 5,000 people. It seems like a high number.
Wow. Yeah.
For me, someone who's been there in a lot, but still the number's significant. And that's, I think, where you're talking about, Andy. That's what Wimbledon said. 5,000 is a crazy number. We might as well have 35,000 if you're going to have that scenario.
Right. And now when you watch, both of these games of no fans, some workers, people in the stands and the players, but what I'm looking forward to and trying to understand is the percentage equation that's being talked about a lot for football. 20%, 40%, 50%. I have no idea how that's going to work to protect people's safety.
Well, hey, Andy, they don't have any idea either. I mean, that's the point. Nobody has any idea. So we can talk about the stuff that used to happen. We can kind of look at what's happening, or we can sort of foresee what we think is going to happen in the future. But that's sort of the beauty of this, is nobody really knows what's going to happen, and it's sort of on the fly. I mean, you get to watch this sort of as it's happening. I think one of the sad things, and there's lots of sad things, but one of the things that it sort of struck me is, I don't know if you saw, but the Giants have 12 or 20 coaches. Not really sure exactly how many, but one of their coaches is a woman, is a female, Alyssa Knockin, who by all accounts is a really high quality person, and it really knows the game and stuff. And so you think about it, if it had been a normal situation and you'd been a crowd there, and she'd been coaching at first base, I don't know, I'd like to think that she would have gotten a standing ovation or some sort of an ovation, and she sort of got cheated out of that. But we all sort of got to watch it, and I think there's a lot of things that are going on, and hopefully people who love the game will be interested enough in what's going on. There's going to be some people who just say, hey, you know what? Wake me up when it's over or when you're ready to go. And I totally understand that, and I can appreciate that. And particularly the people who actually pay for this or get paid for it, this affects them more than any other. So right now it's sort of a bastardized version of what we all have come to love. But I think it's sort of better than nothing, and it's worth watching. And who knows, maybe once people experience a 60-game season, they might say, that's all I need.
Well, you've heard a number of broadcasters worried. I think Kipe and a few others said, well, if this works out, that's another reason not to take us on the road. Let us do it from our den. And as you were talking about the Giants coach and breaking a barrier, I was thinking about taking a knee. Now, just a year or two ago, that would be national front page news. I mean, yes, it did make news, but not nearly the news that it made, especially, with breaking different barriers. And in terms of going back to noise, I would have liked teams to have people, the leather lungers, give me the best razzing that you have. So you can scream at the umpire during the game. You have that ability to hit that. I'd like to see them do it at Cutouts 2.0. Booing, standing ovations, all of that stuff. It can be done.
Wouldn't it be great if they had a cutout with an audio track of Crazy George?
I think it's great. I know Cobble was trying to figure out how to have the drum crew in there, and I was just so disappointed that Dave didn't try to sneak in as a cutout last night at Oracle. I figured, he loves that whole rolling thing. That sort of bummed me out. that I didn't see him show up.
Hey, listen, the game gets to sort of experiment now. I think it's sort of interesting is now, you hear people like Kipe sort of worried about if baseball figures out that they don't need to travel announcers, maybe they won't do that anymore. Boy, talk about history repeating itself. That used to be the only way that you could get a game was some recreation of some game done, where you'd have a piece of wood and you'd bang it against something and it would be a base hit. And, you'd kind of do the into the microphone to, simulate crowd noise. I mean, maybe that's where we're going again.
I think one of the guys who's not worried about this is the magnificent John Miller, who can do every broadcaster. So you can get rid of everybody, right? And just hire Miller. Yeah. Like, hey, John, we got a game tonight. Do Vinny, do this guy, do that guy. He's the master of that.
Well, having had the experience of calling an awful lot of sports remotely and having done Olympic sports that way, and having known that next summer, if the Olympics are able to be held in Tokyo, I would tell you that at least 3/4 of the NBC presentation will come from Connecticut. That's the world.
Right.
That's the way it is. And so everybody, whether you're a young guy on the way up or you're like us and Kipe and you're kind of playing the 17th and 18th holes right now, that's the way it's going to be. I was taken, guys, because I wasn't sure how I'd react, but watching the two games that were just played on television here, the sound, the little buzz underneath the soundtrack, I actually liked it.
I did too.
Yeah, it struck me that baseball is, even on television, it's a background sport. You don't sit there.
It didn't bother me at all.
Yeah,
it really
I thought it was really good.
And I was reminded that back in the 80s, up in Seattle, when the Mariners played in the Kingdome, which was really a mausoleum, and with no people in it, it was really bad. One of our, Andy and our buddies, and I can't remember his name, you'll remember it, Bill Knudsen, who was their marketing guy, he actually had sound piped into the upper deck just to make it sound better, and he got busted for it. Somebody took him to task about it, and it was like a big scandal. Whereas now, baseball is basically saying you have to do this. You have to sort of juice this stuff up. So it's fascinating to watch, and I think this is better than nothing. I think we're going to see basically how inventive the people who play the game and the people who sort of run the game can be, and we'll hope that the people who own the game and play the game will get the wisdom and humility to figure out a way to keep the game going after this season's over with.
Yeah, and I look at, again, the most important thing is to keep everyone safe, but I'd love to see an opportunity to potentially open up the ballpark for a few little league teams to play each other on the field in a totally safe environment. I mean, that is a dream come true, which could happen. I realize there are protocols and all of that, but the teams, as Pat said, are now, the new normal isn't, it's the new different. And if you're not thinking about the new different, you're going to have serious problems, because if you just look at baseball, they went through a nasty period in this negotiation, which got them down to 60 games, but haven't even agreed on a long-term labor agreement to 22. So what's going to happen in 21? You don't want that. You want the most positive positioning of baseball in 21.
This is sort of the tip of the iceberg, because you think, we get to at least watch something at the big level, but think about this. There's 160 minor league teams that sort of just got their season wiped out, which meant that there's thousands of players who were hoping to play at that level, fans who were hoping to see their baseball, who all of a sudden aren't going to be able to see anything. And then even get past that, Little League has been postponed. Yeah. And so you say, well, can baseball survive all this? Well, I think they probably can, but it is going to take a toll somewhere where there's going to be some kids that just say, you know what, it was really, really fun, but I'd rather do this, because at least I know I can do this. So, who knows what the long-term effect of this will be? I mean, if it's sort of like history, it'll eventually come back, but there'll be an effect somehow. The people who will remember this one by the way it made them feel.
And you think about baseball being not probably, the most dominant sport in terms of statistics over decades or a century. And now this is an asterisk season, how that's going to play. It hit me 2 or 3 days ago when the NBA had this announcement that all the players in the bubble, tested negative for COVID. And you'd normally think, hey, that guy's averaging 21 and a half points a game. He has 14 assists. Like, wow, we did it. No positive tests. Okay, who's going to bat what? Who's going to be the MVP? No parade any place for the World Series champ. You're going to have to figure out how to do it in a different fashion.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think a lot of people are pointing out that baseball is going to confront, right? Because I forget, someone very smart said this to me early on, that this is going to be a test for all of us of human behavior, because that's what we have to change, right? We have to change human behavior in order to make this thing work long term. So we're seeing right now the challenge for college students, college athletes coming back to campus. Can you change as a 20-year-old your behavior, right? Can the frat parties tamp themselves down? Can that happen? In the bubble, will there be, in fact, I don't know if you guys saw this, there was a tennis player, a fairly successful American tennis player, who was playing in this world team tennis bubble that's going on right now at the Greenbrier in West Virginia, pretty much 3 weeks of everybody being there, and they're going on. And but one player violated the protocol. They threw her out, sent her home.
Well, what about the Joker? I mean,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah, that was not a bubble, unfortunately. That was
right.
Andy's talking about Novak Djokovic in Serbia a month or so ago. Where I was going to say is that's where baseball's going to fade, though, because baseball's going to have to travel, right? So can the teams stay, and can the human behavior of the baseball players stay tame as they travel?
Well, we're definitely going to see that, and there's so many bad things that have happened with the pandemic, but there are some sort of good things that have happened. You say is that it's certainly given all of us, shaken us out of our comfort zone. It's given baseball and all sports a sort of a dose of humility to sort of figure out how to do it. I got to tell you, baseball at least is going now. I hate to say this, but I sort of can't wait to see how the NFL, their big announcement early on was, you know what, we're not going to play any games in Europe or Japan. We're just going to go on as natural, and sort of like that's the way it's going to be. And who knows what their season is going to be like or what's going to happen. But every sport out there is having to go through the same thing. And we all are going through it in our own ways. So I guess the way to look at it is, this is what we can give you. Do you want to watch it, or do you want to be a part of it or not? And you have that choice.
And football just yesterday, I guess, the power of labor and management says, oh, no preseason games. Right. To Pat's point, we're not going to play in Dusseldorf or Madrid or, Hokkaido. Well, you're not going to play in Chicago. And the Philadelphia Eagles tell their fans, hey, you're not going to be able to come into our stadium to watch any game during the upcoming season. And to Pat's point, I literally want to see, in a sport that exchanges bodily fluids on every single play, I just want to see their protocols during the game. I don't care what the helmets look like. How do you handle a fumble? Is there a spray crew that comes off the sideline in hazmat suits and sprays all 7 people that tried to get the fumble? I don't know.
I want to chime in here with Mr. Gallagher. I think that's one of the great virtues of this pandemic. Did what human beings could not do forever, which was to get rid of especially the 4th week of the NFL preseason. That should have, the pandemic has been wiped that out, thank God. But I want to go back, because Pat, you touched on something that both of you guys should really talk about. that I think's been lost a little bit, because it is great to have baseball back in some form. And I totally on board, Pat. Anything's better than nothing. Minor league baseball, that stings. And we all know people, here where we live in the Bay Area, a good team in San Jose, a very successful team in Stockton, very successful team in Sacramento. They're all shut down for the year. And ramp that out across the country into smaller communities where that's vital, right? That link. Well, I just feel so badly for that.
It is. I say it's vital. I mean, none of this. It's as vital as miniature golf and going to the movies, and in these small. But it's the sort of community activity that happens in 160 communities around, and all of a sudden it's not going to happen. So they're going to have to find other things to do. Is it a tragedy? No. It's a hardship for the people who count on it, and it will have some effect. And but I think what we tend to do is, after we grieve at things like this, we sort of tend to get, our tendency is to sort of get over it and move on to the next thing. I think minor league baseball is really important in this country. It's important to the development of not only of players, but the development of fans. And I know that there's issues with the minor leagues and Major League Baseball anyway. I mean, baseball would love to control all of it. And, baseball right now hasn't shown that they can control the 30 teams that they have, let alone control 160 or their preferred number seems to be 140. So look, we'll let those people figure it out. But all the people who seem to get hurt by it, or to seem to get affected negatively, are all sort of looked at as sort of collateral damage. Well, you know what? At some point, collateral damage, there's a tipping point, and collateral damage goes to people say, you know what? I'm going to do something else.
Well, Pat, you got a call the other day from some guy in sports that brought up this issue about minor league baseball, I think, in terms of what does that sport do? And I had to change my hat for those that don't know it. This is the El Paso Chihuahua logo. Edford, our good friend, runs that team, massively successful. Yeah. And the number that hits home to me, last year's annual attendance for the 160 teams was over 40 million fans. Think about that for a second. 40 million fans who will not get to see one inning of live baseball from communities that we don't even know how to spell their names, with the coolest names in all of sports. And if you lose that, to Pat's point, then maybe you go, we didn't have baseball in El Paso. We didn't have it in Pawtucket. We didn't have it. Maybe we'll do something else next year. I don't want that to happen, because to me, minor league baseball is the ultimate laboratory to grow greatness in the major leagues. Not on the field, but in the front office. And salespeople and marketers and promoters, you look at it, many of them came from training in the minor leagues.
Yeah. And Andy, you talked about that concept of having little league teams playing on the big league fields. My God, wouldn't it be great? And I know there's probably 50 liability reasons why it can't happen, but wouldn't it be great to bring the minor league players from the A's and the Giants together for a weekend, right? While the teams are on the road, and have them play a weekend's worth of games between our two ballparks. And I understand the logistics.
Think about the magic that we created that was free, and we could do it with kids just running the bases at the end of the games.
Yeah. Well, I think in order for that to happen, I think you'll have to organize a Zoom call for all the lawyers who would opine on that stuff, get them occupied. And while they're doing whatever they do, let's just allow people to enjoy these big, beautiful ballparks that we have. And look, guys like Andy and I, who used to do this for a living, and now we can just, like anybody else, we can talk about it, and we can think about it, and we can laugh about it. I don't know. Overall, I'm really sad about it all, but we're living through something right now that there's no manual that shows how do you deal with a pandemic. I mean, what I've advised my brethren in baseball now and other businesses, I hope you're keeping a diary, and I hope you're writing this stuff down, because somebody's going to write the manual or write the here's what you do during a pandemic, and who better to figure it out but the people who actually live through it.
Yeah. And I have this here. It just happened to pop in. But I mean, we went through this, right? We went through this, and people came to Pat and I and said, well, tell us about how this deals with COVID-19. It doesn't. It was tragic. It was terrible. It helped reunite the Bay Area. But COVID-19 and the social issues of our country, completely different. And we have to deal with them in completely different ways. Pat hit on it before. It's all about humanity, trust, and leadership. And if we can sort of get that act together, then I think we have a positive strategic roadmap.
Hey, Teddy, we might as well talk about the national anthem. I mean, you haven't brought it up, but talk about the national anthem and what's going on. I mean, we thought about a couple of years ago when Colin Kaepernick took a knee and everybody was horrified by all that. Well, this is a different time and a different age, and I'm sure there were a lot of high-paid baseball and football executives trying to figure out how to control what happens around the national anthem. Should we have it? Should we ditch it? What should we do? And what we saw with these exhibition games is if we just sort of let the participants do what they sort of want to do, they're not, you may argue about it, but it all of a sudden was a moment where you had some people kneeling, some people standing, but putting their hands on others' shoulders. It's a discussion point. But I think it's also one of the ways that sports can sort of say, you know what, we're in a different age right now. And it's something that that if sports has any contribution, which it does, it's to show that this stuff doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in a bubble. We're talking about real issues, and there's much bigger problems out there than what any of us or any of the people in sports has to deal with. But that little national anthem thing is that little barometer now that sort of shows what everybody's colors are. And I'm just saying people are looking at it differently than they did 2 years ago.
Absolutely.
I sent a note to Bruce Jenkins when he wrote that piece a few days ago about doing away with the national anthem for all of sports, at least during this process, and said, Bruce, what kind of security do you have in and around your house? And he came back to like, what are you talking about? And I go, I'm kidding, but I hope I'm not kidding, right? Because people take that unbelievably seriously.
But, and I, as you said that, Pat, I'm thinking about your point, allowing things to happen organically, naturally. Being around the Pac-12 the last 4 years since 2016, Kaepernick, et cetera. And in the Pac-12, where of course you're dealing with 12 universities that are standing on the principle of free speech, it has not been an issue. It's if an athlete, if a soccer player, if a lacrosse player, football, baseball, whatever sport chooses to display something during the national anthem, fine, so be it. And therefore it has not been an issue. And the contrast is this morning reading these jarring comments from the owner of the Atlanta WNBA team, who was also gifted a Senate seat in the state of Georgia, who has publicly said that Black Lives Matter will cost the franchise fans and the league fans. And you read that, and that goes back to Pat's point where you start to think, maybe this is how we had a civil war in our country once upon a time.
Right.
Mind-blowing to me.
I never, like I said before, I never could visualize, I never could understand how such a thing like the Civil War could ever happen. But with what we've seen over the last few months of how people, and particularly the last month, I can all of a sudden see how that happens. Our daughter Katie lives in Portland, Oregon, and we get reports from her every day about what's going on. And my advice to her is stay in the house. Don't go out there. But you know what? This has affected her in a way that no history lesson ever could have affected her. And she's going to come out of this as a better and more informed person. And so I think it's important. It has a place. It's a discussion. sports sort of gives people the sort of forum to talk about stuff like that, which I think is one of the things we really miss about sports.
And, you know, big events, right? So August the 6th through the 10th, in normal years, we have the PGA Championship being played in our market at beautiful Harding Park. And, you know, it's going to have 0 spectators. But you think about how that is just sort of been on the back page. Like, wow. I mean, this is a big event, all kinds of parties, corporate stuff. No, not happening. And, you know, we'll see how the fans take to watching that. I think golf and motor racing have done pretty well in this because you don't necessarily need those fans to see the greatness of somebody driving a car or driving a golf ball.
Yeah. And I'll come back into where I think the big litmus test is going to be. And I'm not sure the composition of the entire field for the PGA, but as of right now, the U.S. Open Tennis Championship is still on, and it's supposed to start August 31st in New York. They just lost an event in Washington, D.C. this week because of the number of European countries that are putting travel restrictions in place towards Americans, towards travel to or from the United States. But I'm told the USTA is going to go forward, and this is because of the true global nature of a major tennis event. We're 5.5 weeks away from, I think, what's going to be the biggest litmus test, and it goes beyond sports. It's going to be, you know, what is Andrew Cuomo going to allow to have happen in New York State? What kind of quarantine procedures is he going to put in place? And then what will the reciprocal countries do when the Frenchman, the Spaniard, and the woman from Italy decide to go home? It's
or you know, so many different actors and actresses in this real life play. I mean, CIF saying no football out of California when kids come back to school, and I think it's tonight or no, tomorrow night when who's throwing out the first pitch in Washington? Not the president.
our leader.
Not the president of the United States. The little point guard from Brooklyn, New York, Dr. Anthony Fauci. That will be a magnificent event for many people.
But hey, Teddy, on your tennis thing, at least one thing tennis won't have to worry about if they have no fans. They won't have to worry about telling people to be quiet during the matches, right?
Well,
I mean, let's keep it down out there.
Yeah. Here's an interesting dynamic. And I've talked a lot about this with some people who were involved in recent weeks. So there was an event in Charleston, South Carolina, the last week of June, tennis event, 16 women, top players, played in the stadium there with no fans, hotel within walking distance, pods for each player distanced within the stadium while the event was going on. The biggest thing in tennis, as we've come to watch during the years, are the ball kids handling towels in between each point. Over. Players touch their own towels. Balls picked up with a ball tube like you would at a tennis club. Anyway, point being, this event went off for 6 days without a hitch. The 16 professional women, including 4, I think, at the top 20 in the world who are Americans, all handled their protocols beautifully. Not a complaint, not a slip, nothing. And I'm wondering from the two of you, because of your vast experience in sports, what is also next on the horizon is this ongoing attempt to play college football. And now this is a male-only sport. Can you get these 80 young men through how many different schools, depending on the tier of football, to adhere to those kinds of social protocols? I think this is such, as Andy, you touched on the NFL, ramp it down a notch to college where you're on campuses. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. I think this is still going to be a huge, huge challenge to pull off.
Auburn, Alabama, forget about it. I mean, if you tell people only 30% of the fans can go to that game, I've said this before, fans will show up with firearms. Mm-hmm. Hey, here's my little friend, I'm coming in. And so, and you talk about those players, 80 players on a team or more, it's 2 a.m. Do you know where your star running back is? let's look about human nature. That's what this is all about. So between those that are absolutely not going to have a season like the Ivy League to others that are looking to have some percentage of fans, I don't know how those that are going to let fans in, I don't know how they're going to manage that.
Well, I sort of subscribe to the, if there's nobody on campus, how do you actually have games that involve students? I mean, it's one of those things where you sort of have to have some perspective here. And sort of the ones I feel for really are for the athletes probably who this is their, I mean, next year they're going to be a year older, or they're going to be a year out of school. They're going to be missing that experience. The fans are going to, I mean, you could go to the Southeastern Conference and you could tell them you can still tailgate and you can still, barbecue, drink beer, whatever. And they might miss the game, but there's the social activity that's involved in all this stuff is something that can go on anyway. So look, I think college sports is it is a whole other animal because these athletes are going through and supposedly getting an education. We all kind of watch them and sort of live vicariously through them. And you sort of feel now that I'd say if there's no students on campus and you can't come on campus, there shouldn't be any athletics. And we can pick it up later on when we find a way to make people safe.
There's another story here that's just starting to play out, specifically in football or basketball, where in high school, the player goes, oh, I'm not playing high school as a senior. I'm coming out early and going to college, right, which they can do. Or college players going, I don't have a senior season. I'm leaving. I might have been All-American and all that. I'm going to the pros. Or I'm going to play internationally in basketball. That kind of environment, which starts with young kids going to try to have their dream. We talked about minor league baseball. That's all being rearranged now, and to Pat's earlier point, nobody's figured it out. But can you imagine having the greatest player in your high school history saying, see ya, going to college? You won't see.
I don't know. I was the second to the last guy on my high school team that won a city championship. And I sort of looked at those guys saying, this is sort of a dose of humility that I think we all need in some respect. It's a hell of a way to get it. But I think that life will go on. And no matter what people say, and they posture and pontificate and predict and all that, there's lots bigger issues than what we're talking about.
And, Pat, you hit on a good point, because the most hopeful thing I've seen in terms of this little small slice of life, sports coming back, was this tennis event I referenced in Charleston, where I watched it for 6 days, where people changed their behavior, right? The participants, they changed their behavior to make it happen. And I watched it the last 2 nights in baseball, where I saw, Bob Melvin and Gabe Kapler and the managers, the leaders, so to speak, standing on the top steps of the dugouts wearing face coverings.
Easier for you to say.
I know. You can tell I haven't been working. But that's to me that's giving me the hope, is that if these people can change their behavior, the people who participate, there's no shot of this taking place unless that happens. So that's where I'm taking and holding my hope. And now Professor Dolich is holding his hope out.
I just want Dr. Tony to go right to the rubber and with his mask, just a high, hard one, right to COVID-19. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Who has to catch the ball? Don't they have to disinfect it first, or doesn't there have to be some sort of a shield?
Oh, he's got a Purell pitch that he's working on.
All right.
Okay.
When will there be Dolich and Gallagher cutout nights? That's what I want to know.
Well,
you guys have your bobbleheads. It's now we've transformed. It's cutouts.
If we could get the rights from the Muppets for those guys up in the balcony, Pat and I might do that.
Oh yeah, with Waldorf and Statler. Yeah, that's exactly how we're looked at. And you know what? That's what we are. I mean, we're two old gaffers sitting up in the balcony, sort of describing all this stuff. And what we think is, it amuses us, And hopefully it amuses anybody who's watching this. But in the whole scheme of things, it doesn't really matter.
You guys are knowing exactly what I've told many partners I've worked with in sports broadcasting through the years. The higher up you go from the field, the smarter you get, right?
That's totally
Look
true.
Look around at Oracle and the Coliseum. You might see us in the third deck in the coming season, sitting next to each other going, hey, look at that. That's ridiculous.
And
Nah, it's going to be it'll be a cutout. It'll be a cutout.
Oh, no, I meant a cutout.
Okay.
that's why they are called the wise men.